This is an instructional video on exercise and cooperative play for the service dog you're raising. It has ideas for providing your service dog pup with the necessary exercise and shows a number of cooperative games and how to play them. It's well accepted that exercise provides both physical and mental stimulation. Dogs who have these needs met are happier and easier to manage. Dogs who do not receive enough exercise typically find themselves forming undesirable habits in the home. As weekend raisers, you're dealing with puppies and adolescent dogs that have significantly higher exercise requirements than does an adult dog. The goal of exercise with your service dog puppy is to structure games that are cooperative. This means you are the focus of how the game is played, and you decide when the game is over. Taking your dog for a walk is one of the most important ways to get exercise on your service dog. There are two types of walks, one for exposure and one just for exercise. Let's first look at a walk for exercise. These types of walks are less formal. They don't require the pup wear a jacket. They're usually done in places that lack the structure, say, of sidewalks, but they do have rules. There's no pulling, lunging, or dragging allowed, regardless of the fact they're more casual. Dogs should begin learning these types of walks on a 6-foot leash. The handler should focus on rewarding the dog when he's nearby. Concentrate on rewarding the dog every time he checks in, and you'll find he checks in more and more frequently. It doesn't really matter which side the dog is walked on, and his position isn't all that important. The dog is allowed to sniff, but he's not allowed to pull or drag. Each time he does, the handler should cause the dog to check back in. Soon you'll find the dog learning to walk in a space where he's not pulling or dragging. If the dog is responsive on a 6-foot leash, then a longer leash can be employed. It can either be carried or it can be dropped on the ground, but the handler should always maintain control of the leash. The dog has more room to move on a long leash, but the handler should still focus on rewarding the dog when he's nearby. And if the dog does venture too far or pull, the handler should stop and reward the dog for checking in. Even on exercise walks, the dog must remain responsive. Now let's take a look at walks for exposure. These are more structured type walks. They're typically done in a public setting, such as in a downtown area or in a shopping center. This type of walk would require that the puppy wear his puppy coat for identification, and the focus would be on proper walking pace and position. These types of daily walks on the weekend are likely the focus of a lot of instruction at your weekend puppy raising classes. And that's because your ability to comfortably walk your dog in a public setting will directly impact the dog's ability to become properly socialized to the world around him. As you might imagine, the world would appear a calmer and more understandable place to a dog who has good self-control and is well managed. Teaching a dog to walk comfortably on a loose leash takes time and patience. The inmate handlers, you, and your instructor will work as a team to select the equipment and methods used to help your individual dog learn what's expected. This video is really designed to show you what the proper pace and position should look like. That should include the basics of having the dog walk on a loose leash at the handler's side, with the dog's shoulders relatively aligned with the handler's leg. The dog should remain close to the handler's side, and the dog should stop every time the handler stops moving and remain in a standing position. The dog should also offer eye contact before being given the command to walk. Many of the lessons taught at your weekend classes become the foundation to successful walking. Here's a drill you might try for improving your dog's loose leash walking by employing a skill he learned early on. First, let's set up for success by establishing the right leash length. Here you see the handler extending the leash to where the leash would be too long for proper leash walking. Now the handler is making adjustments, but has made the leash too short for the dog to walk comfortably. With the dog sitting at your side like this, the leash should be established so that the snap hangs straight down underneath the dog's chin, and the leash can be gathered up and held somewhat like a baseball bat, pinned on your left hip. From there you can tie a knot in the leash, which will establish a point at which the leash is at the proper length. Keep the hands pinned to your left hip, and the leash will be at the right length. Now as you walk, You might remember having taught your dog this skill early on. When the dog went to lunge for an object as a young dog, he was taught to yield to leash pressure, which taught the dog to back off and move back to the handler's side. This same skill can be applied when you're walking with your dog. Keep the hands pinned to your left hip, and should the dog go to pull, stop moving. The dog learned early on to move back into position at the handler's side. So this is a skill that can be used now in loose leash walking. You might have to guide the dog a little bit to help him know what position you want him to be back in, and you can use a little leash prompt to help put him in the correct spot. The knot you establish in your leash will provide a constant reminder for the proper leash length, and keeping your hands close to your body and pinned on your left hip provides a good, solid anchor should your dog attempt to pull. Techniques like this can make walking more fun for both of you. Along with walking your service dog, you'll need other ways to get it some exercise. Let's look at some cooperative games. Let's begin with the object exchange. This is perhaps the simplest exercise, but it is one that is a foundation to many games to follow. For this game, we'll need 2 toys and some kibble food. Start with 2 toys. Offer one to the dog while enthusiastically saying, "Take." Now exchange the toy for the other while saying, "Give." This game can also be played by using just one toy and exchanging that toy for treats instead of the other. Each dog will have its own preference on how this game can be played. Sometimes it takes some experimentation to find out what works best for your own dog. This dog, like many Labradors, prefers any game that has food involved. But despite this fact, there'll be times when training doesn't go exactly as you expect. Like in this case, where the dog accidentally drops it. If that's the case, try to encourage the dog to pick the object up as opposed to you picking it up yourself. Now let's build on the object exchange by playing the play retrieve. For the play retrieve, we'll need some kibble food, and in this case, 2 tennis balls. To play this game, you'll want to kneel down with a wall about 10 feet in front of you. Roll one ball out in front of the dog and enthusiastically tell the dog, "Fetch." As the dog returns, show the dog your ball and exchange him for the other one that you have, and tell the dog, "Give." Much like our first game, this game can also be played with one ball and food, exchanging the ball for food if the dog prefers. The same commands will be given: fetch for going to take the ball, and give for exchanging the ball for the treat. This game can be made a little more interesting simply by changing where the food is located. Here you see the handler placing the food on a chair. Now the dog has to retrieve the object and work past the food to deliver the ball to the handler. This makes the game a little bit more fun and interesting for both the dog and the handler. Once the dog has a clear understanding of this game and seems to enjoy it, some additional challenges can be added. Here you see the handler beginning to apply some basic obedience with the dog before the dog is sent out to retrieve. The finger can be slipped through the collar, and once the ball is stopped, the dog can again be told to fetch. Other than that, the game is played the same. The dog is told to give and is exchanged for a treat when done well. Adding a little obedience to an exercise like this can sometimes require a little bit more encouragement for the dog, but is really a wonderful way to begin to incorporate a lot of obedience into a real fun cooperative game. Any of the dog's basic obedience skills can be employed here. Here you see the handler asking the dog to do a down, before once again rolling the ball out, asking for attention, and then releasing the dog to fetch. Whichever behavior you choose to ask the dog to do before sending the dog out to fetch, be sure to wait for the dog to give good eye contact. Here you see the handlers sending the ball out, but waiting for the dog to make eye contact before commanding fetch. If your dog has many behaviors, you can think of different ways to combine them. Here you see the handler asking for a sit, eye contact, and then for a touch before sending the dog out to fetch the ball.
Good girl, nice
Mixing
job.
these behaviors up makes it fun for both the handler and the dog, and creates a good foundation for a retrieve, which you'll need later as a service dog. Now let's take the basic skills you've developed outside and play a game of cooperative fetch. The equipment used for this game will include a long leash and the type of toys that won't bounce like a ball would. The types of toys shown here will lay flat when tossed. Another precaution would be to be sure your dog has a tag on his collar. To set up for this game, be sure your dog is on a long leash, in case he has other ideas. Try to keep that leash out in front of you so it doesn't tangle around your feet. Other than that, this game is played somewhat similar to the play Retrieve, except out in front of you. The object is tossed out, the dog is told to fetch. Once the dog has that object, you can attract him back with yours and ask him to give, tossing your object in the other direction. That way the dog plays back and forth in a straight line where you're the center of attention. The game is best played with objects that lay flat when you toss them so they don't bounce away. The objects you saw earlier were round retrieving rings available at pet stores, but the game can be played just as well with a couple of pieces of garden hose cut at 1 foot lengths, as you see here. Much like the other games we've played so far, this game too can be played with one toy and exchanging for food as well. Here you see the handler tossing the object out, telling the dog to fetch, and encouraging the dog to come back and exchanging it for a treat. It really becomes your dog's preference how the game is played, so long as you are always the center of attention, and you start the game and you decide when the game ends. And again, just like in our other exercises previously, you can add a little bit of a challenge to this game as well by putting in a little basic obedience. Here you see the handler asking for a simple sit, getting eye contact, and then encouraging the dog to fetch. Any of the basic obedience skills your dog has mastered would be good to practice here. It improves eye contact, it improves the handler relationship with the dog, and gives you a chance to practice their basic obedience in a fun and entertaining way. It doesn't require a lot of room to play this game either. You can see here the dog is really only running 10 or 15 feet in either direction and in a straight line. Great way to exercise the dog that's safe and cooperative, and once again, you're always the center of attention. One game to avoid at all costs is a game known as Keep Away. This is a game invented by the dog, and it is not a cooperative game. It typically involves the dog running out, grabbing an object, and trying to keep it away from everyone involved. If this should happen, the game stops immediately, and that's why we employ a leash when playing these games outside. Another way to add interest to this game is to practice it while sitting in a chair. This also has a practical application, as it may well be the way a disabled veteran exercises their dog. Cooperative games should produce a dog that at the end of the day is tired, easy to manage, and spends its time dreaming about becoming a service dog.